Something quietly breaks inside a relationship long before either person says a word about it. It doesn't happen with a fight. It doesn't happen with a dramatic moment. It happens in the silence between two people sitting in the same room and feeling completely alone. This is the part of love that nobody warns you about. The slow, invisible erosion of understanding. The moment when the person who once knew everything about you starts feeling like a stranger. And the terrifying truth is most couples don't even notice it happening until it's already too late. Every relationship begins with a kind of emotional electricity. Two people discover each other. They talk for hours. They finish each other's sentences. They feel genuinely deeply understood sometimes for the first time in their lives. That feeling of being understood is not just comforting. Psychologically, it is one of the most powerful human needs. More powerful than physical attraction. More powerful than shared goals or compatibility tests. When someone truly understands you, your fears, your silences, your patterns, it creates a bond that feels unbreakable. But here's what nobody tells you about that bond. It requires constant, active maintenance. And most couples, without realizing it, slowly stop doing the work that keeps it alive. Not because they stop loving each other, but because life moves fast. Routines take over. Assumptions replace conversations. And two people who once understood everything about each other begin operating on outdated versions of who the other person actually is. This is where the distance begins. Not with betrayal, not with conflict, with quiet, invisible assumptions. Think about how most couples start. In the early stages, everything is new. Every conversation reveals something. Every shared experience builds a deeper picture of the other person. You pay attention differently when someone is new to you. You listen carefully. You ask follow-up questions. You notice small things, the way they pause before answering, the topics that light them up, the memories that make them go quiet. This kind of attention is not just romantic curiosity. It is deep psychological investment. You are actively building a map of who this person is. But somewhere between the first year and the fifth year, something shifts. You stop building the map. You start relying on the one you already have. This is the first invisible fracture in understanding. You stop asking questions because you believe you already know the answers. You stop noticing the small things because familiarity has replaced observation. You stop listening with the same depth because the story feels familiar. What you don't realize is that the person in front of you has been quietly changing this whole time. Their fears have evolved. Their needs have shifted. Their definition of feeling loved has transformed through experiences you may not have fully registered. But because they look the same, because they are present every day, because the routine feels stable, you assume you still know them completely. And they are doing the same thing with you. Two people living together, operating on emotional blueprints of each other that are years out of date. This is not cruelty. It is not neglect in the obvious sense. It is something far more subtle and far more dangerous. It is the psychology of assumed understanding. There is a specific moment in many relationships and most people only recognize it in retrospect when the dynamic quietly tilts. One person tries to express something, a new fear, a changing need, a feeling that has been building slowly beneath the surface. And instead of being met with curiosity, they are met with an automatic response. I know, you always feel this way. This is just how you are. Those words feel like understanding. They sound like familiarity, but psychologically they are the opposite. They are the sound of someone closing a door. Because what the person actually needed in that moment was not to be categorized. They needed to be heard as the person they are right now, not the person they were 2 years ago. When this happens once, it's forgettable. When it becomes a pattern, it creates something that psychologists call emotional invalidation. The quiet, repeated experience of reaching out and not being truly received. Over time, the person on the receiving end stops reaching out as deeply. They begin editing themselves before they speak. They learn which parts of their inner world are welcome and which parts will simply be filed away under an old label. And slowly, without any dramatic confrontation, the depth of communication begins to shrink, not because the love is gone, but because the safety of being fully known no longer feels available. What is actually happening here, beneath the surface? Psychologists who study long-term relationships have identified a pattern called the familiarity illusion. It describes how the human brain, wired for efficiency, begins to shortcut the process of actually perceiving the people closest to us. When we see a stranger, the brain activates high levels of attention. Everything is new data. Everything is worth processing carefully. But when we see someone we have known for years, the brain shifts into pattern recognition mode. Instead of truly observing, it retrieves. It pulls up the stored model it has built of this person and interacts with that model rather than with the actual living, evolving human being standing in front of it. This is not a character flaw. It is a cognitive efficiency mechanism. The brain conserves energy by relying on what it already knows. The problem is that human beings are not static. We change continuously through stress, through growth, through loss, through quiet shifts in values and priorities that accumulate invisibly over time. When your brain's stored model of your partner is 6 months old, the gap between that model and reality is manageable. When it is 3 years old, the gap can be enormous. And here is the deeply unsettling part. Most couples never realize this gap exists. They feel the distance, the friction, the disconnection, the vague sense that something is off, but they misidentify the cause. They blame stress. They blame busy schedules. They blame each other for things that are really just symptoms of a much deeper drift. The real issue is not that they stopped loving each other. The real issue is that they stopped truly seeing each other. This pattern is not rare. It is not a sign of a weak relationship or incompatible personalities. It is one of the most common and least discussed dynamics in modern long-term relationships. We live in an era where people are expected to grow rapidly. Careers shift, values evolve. Personal awareness deepens through therapy, reflection, and life experience. The person you married at 28 may have genuinely different emotional needs by 35, not because something went wrong, but because growth is natural. The relationships that survive this are not the ones where both people happen to stay the same. They are the ones where both people stay genuinely curious about each other through every stage of change. Curiosity is the underrated cornerstone of long-term connection, not passion, not compatibility, curiosity. The willingness to approach the person you have known for years with the same open attention you gave them when they were new to you. The ability to ask, not just answer. To listen, not just respond. To say quietly and genuinely, tell me who you are right now, not who I think you are, not who you were right now. Modern relationship psychology increasingly points to this as the core difference between couples who grow together and couples who grow apart. It is not about grand romantic gestures. It is not about conflict resolution techniques or communication frameworks. It is about the daily quiet practice of actually seeing the person in front of you. And in a world full of distractions, screens, schedules, pressures, noise, that practice is harder than it has ever been before. Here is why this matters beyond theory. When two people stop truly understanding each other, something very specific happens to the emotional texture of the relationship. It becomes functional. It becomes logistical. It becomes about managing shared life rather than actually sharing it. The conversations narrow. They focus on practical things, schedules, responsibilities, decisions. The deeper conversations about fears, dreams, the small private thoughts that define inner life slowly disappear. Not because either person decided to stop having them, but because the space for them quietly closed, and both people feel it. They feel the thinning of the connection without being able to name exactly what thinned. One person might interpret this as falling out of love, might interpret it as proof that they were never truly compatible. But in many cases, neither interpretation is accurate. What actually happened was simpler and more fixable than either person realizes. They stopped being curious about each other. They stopped updating their understanding. They let the living relationship be replaced by a static memory of it. The question worth sitting with is this: when did you last learn something genuinely new about the person closest to you? Not a fact, a preference, something real, something that shifted how you see them. Because the answer to that question says more about the health of a relationship than almost anything else. Does emotional distance begin the moment two people stop talking, or the moment they stop truly listening? And is it possible to feel completely lonely inside a relationship that, from the outside, looks completely fine? Understanding is not something you build once and keep forever. It is something you rebuild, quietly and continuously, through every version of the person you love. The couples who last are not the ones who never drift. They are the ones who notice the drift and choose again and again to close the distance. Not with grand words, not with dramatic gestures, just with the simple, profound act of paying attention.